Hi, I've titled this talk, A Love Under Canvas. Before I begin to explain myself, I have two questions that I'd like you to ponder and keep in mind during this talk. Okay, so question number one, how do we keep God king over our lives? And question number two, what part do we play in building God's temple? So thank you to Jen, who very kindly read 1 Kings 5, 6 and 8, or some verses from it. This is a really pivotal moment in the history of the Israelites, where for the first time since entering Canaan, they're living in peace. They've got a king, Solomon, who's David's son by Bathsheba, who's been anointed by God and given the gift of wisdom. Now he rules over Jerusalem, and as God indicated to David, Solomon will build the temple for God on the land that David, his father, purchased for it. So why did I title this talk Love Under Canvas if this passage is really about creating a building out of stone and bronze and cypress wood and gold and many other things? Well, you could say the story of the temple, in part, started with canvas. So I want to tell you a story about Jen and I. It's about our love for camping and getting under canvas. So when Jen and I first met, she had a little tent, and in all honesty, I used to make fun of it. It was cheap, it was simple, I'm a tent snob, and rather annoyingly, it was so small that when I went to bed, I had to unzip the tent and leave my feet in the porch. Now, one night we were camping under the shadow of Snowdon, and there was an almighty storm. And when we woke in the morning, the campsite was completely devastated. Most people had left in the night. The scene was carnage. There was tents destroyed everywhere and belongings scattered around. Now, there were two tents standing in that campsite, and one was a very expensive North Face tent, and the other, yep, you got it, Jen's lovely little tent that I belittled and never again. Now, sometime later, we had Macy, and there just wasn't enough room for the three of us in Jen's amazing stormproof tent. So we upgraded to a family tent. It had a central living area, it had a porch for wet stuff, it had 3 bedrooms, and it suited us, and it worked well for our family. After a year or two, we just felt that maybe if we were off the ground, we'd be a little more comfortable, we'd sleep better, so we invested in a trailer tent. It was fantastic. It was easy to put up. I could do it single-handed, and if Jem tended to the girls, if she was tending to the girls, it was that I could do it single-handed. It was comfortable and warm. Anyway, time went by. Life's a bit tiring with kids, and the place where we got most refreshment was the great outdoors. But the UK climate being what it was, we just couldn't get out camping for more than half the year. So we traded in the trailer tent and we bought a caravan just like this. And boy was it comfortable. It had heating. And if I popped up the roof, I could even stand upright, and we loved it. But weirdly, rather than taking half a day or a day to pack the car, as it usually did for family camping trips, it seemed to take us 2 weeks to pack the caravan. We started questioning, I wonder why that is. But even as pleased as I was with our lovely caravan, what I really desired more than anything else was this. Isn't it beautiful? It's an Airstream. Call it the American in me, but I just love the silver shiny vestibule. And then time moved on, we moved to India, and in order to help fund that year, we sold our caravan, and when we got back home, we didn't have enough money to buy a new one. So yes, you've got it, we bought a tent. You see, what our original desire for was simplicity, to find refreshment, to feel attached to nature, and in that place, we felt closest to God. Now, there's one final part to this story, but I'm going to come back to that at the end of the sermon. So why have I told you this story? You can see how my heart's desire shifted. Possibly you could say it slipped away from what I truly loved, the wildness and simplicity, to something else. And in the same way, God knew that if the Israelites took their eye off of him as king, that they would slip away from God, and he would not be able to dwell with them. So let's take a brief look at how God planned to remain king over us and what happened. It actually starts way back at the beginning in the Garden of Eden, where God resided with Adam and Eve. There was no need for a temple. God literally resided with them in the garden until Adam and Eve were banished from the garden. So we fast track forward in the biblical history to the Israelites, and God needed a special place where he could meet with man on earth. And originally he met with Moses and the Israelites in the tent of meeting. And literally it was a place where God met with his people. It was his dwelling place on earth, the house of God. Now the tent of meeting was right in the centre of the camp, at the heart of where they lived. It was literally 10 linen curtains draped around a structure made of wooden poles, covered with goat's hair curtains, and over this a covering of tanned ram skins. It was simple, it was beautiful, and most of all, movable. It went with the people wherever they were, so God resided with them. Now, when the Israelites moved into the promised land of Canaan, the tent of meeting, now referred to as the tabernacle, came with them, and it moved around to Shiloh and then Nob and then Gibeon, and it had incredible significance, but it wasn't at the heart of the nation. And finally, in our story, we get back to Kings, and the people have asked Samuel, appoint us a king to judge us like all nations. And God says, they have rejected me from being king over them. Why does God say that? Because God knows if he isn't king, that the people are going to slip. Now David has brought the peace to the nation of Israel, and after he dies, Solomon, his son, is residing in Jerusalem and has been anointed with the task of building the temple of God. The temple, the house of God, will be a gathering point for all of the people, a symbol of their unity in the worship of God. Now, God is gracious and he listens to their plea. And he said, for I have regarded my people because their cry has come to me. And that's why he gives them the temple. But even though he knew that they would slip, and boy did they slip afterwards, but that's another story for another speaker. But God had an eternal plan that would take back kingship. And this takes us forward to Jesus and the New Testament. And in John 1:14 says, the Word became flesh and pitched a tent among us, and we saw his glory. That's the Bible Project's take on that verse. With these words, Jesus is described as the tabernacle, as the divine temple glory that has become human. And Jesus says that destroy this temple, and in 3 days I will raise it up. Now, Jews thought that Jesus was referring to the destruction of the actual temple building in Jerusalem. And this accusation was thrown against him in his trial. But really, he was talking about his body being the temple. God's master plan. Jesus' body would become the temple, the place where God's presence dwelt on earth. Now, let me show you a quick clip of a video from the Bible Project. Just give me a second to get that up. Here we go.
Temple. And here we come to the story of Jesus. He said that through him, God's presence and rule was coming into our world in a new way. And he presented himself as a new kind of priest.
But Jesus wasn't a priest, and he didn't work in the temple.
Right. Jesus said that God's presence, his rest and rule, was filling the world through his own life, death, and resurrection. Jesus was claiming that he was the true temple, and this new temple would expand out to include all of creation.
That's a really big claim.
And it got even bigger. After his resurrection, Jesus said that God's presence would come to dwell in and among his followers so that they would become mini temples.
Communities of people where God rests and rules.
Exactly. This is the Bible's vision of the church, which is described as a temple.
Not a building, but people.
Yeah, like when Peter says, "You all are living stones built up as a temple for God's Spirit to dwell."
So, at the end of the story, do we ever get a new physical temple?
Well, not exactly. What we see is a renewed cosmic temple, just like Genesis 1. And this new creation doesn't need a temple building because through Jesus, all creation is now the place where God rests and rules the world with his people.
So, finally, we get to that point where the baton is passed to us. And in Corinthians, Paul says, "Do you not know that you are a temple of God?" You, the church, he's referring to. "And the Spirit of God rests within you." Now that is exciting. And it's going to bring us back to those questions that I had at the start. How do we keep God king over our lives? Well, I think that to keep king God over our lives, that we have to center our lives and our gaze upon him as the people in Jerusalem gazed up to that temple. Now we have to take care all the way along that we don't slip, that other things in our lives don't become our king, that other things don't become idols other than God. I mean, these can be anything. I mean, the classic is money, but our jobs can become idols and take kingship. Even our houses, the television, and even ministry can take over the kingship. To keep God king, we need to be obedient to what he is asking us. We need to look to him, to his word to guide us through life. We need to trust him in his complete goodness despite the trials of life. And we need to worship him only, spending time with him and listening to him. So what part do we play in God's temple? I mean, that's a responsibility. And I think the first thing is that we have to honour God's presence. We worship God. We remember the sacrifice that Jesus made through communion. And we are united as a church, locally, nationally, and throughout the world. And to build God's temple, we need to reveal God's presence to the community around us. That's what Solomon's temple did in Jerusalem. It was high up for them all to see. And how do we do that? We do that through all of the different things that we do in church. We do it through Alpha. We do it through cards like you're going to give out in Seven Beach, Easter cards with little gifts. We do it by investing in the community's children in their school and inside our church. We do it through the food bank. We do it through mission by supporting other people to go and spread the gospel. We visit the elderly. We look out for the vulnerable. And all of these things build God's temple, and all of these things are active. We have to be active builders because temples don't build themselves. So I said I'd come back to my story right at the end. You remember me, we'd gone full circle from tent all the way up to caravan and back down to tent again. The girls had a tent and Jen and I decided we needed a tent as well. So we thought, let's keep it simple. Let's get a 2-man tent. And in my rush to buy that 2-man tent, I accidentally bought a tent a size too small. And yes, you've guessed it, I no longer fit in the tent. My feet are back sticking out of the porch. Thank you. Just closing, I just wanted to say that I actually found a couple of great videos. One that describes the temple in all of its detail, but shows it to you very visually. And the other is the full video and the words that go with it for the Bible Project one that I showed you. So I'm going to give those to John or Anyaran or somebody, and they're going to send those links out to you this week if you want to take another look at that. Okay, thank you so much.